Hello everyone, Razorblade Mango here, and here we are. Let's talk about Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Now, I've talked about this game a lot on the channel ever since it came out. This is going to be the full-on review of it after spending many hours and 2 playthroughs going through it, and I'm going to spend the majority of this review keeping it spoiler-free, but there's going to be a section at the very end that will get into some of the more major spoilery stuff. So if you haven't played Expedition 33 and you don't want to get spoiled on some things, or if you're in the process of playing it and haven't gotten to the stuff I'm going to talk about later near the ending, then you're good throughout most of this review. But I will give advance warning when I'm going to be talking about the spoilery stuff, and I'll give you enough time to come back to your phone if you're away from it, or if you're near your computer to tab over and stop, or whatever you need to do to opt out. This is a game that I have been looking forward to ever since it was announced last year at Xbox's annual showcase. But despite how promising it looked, I was skeptical about the game. Because, of course, this is developed by Sandfall Interactive, which are a first-time studio with a lot of them being junior talent. They actually have a pretty amazing story to go along with the development of the game. And if you want, there's a few videos out there that I highly recommend. Skill Up released this near hour-and-a-half video the day that I'm recording this, that talks about the development story behind this, where he interviews some of the devs and some of the voice actors. And there's another shorter one, I forget which YouTube channel it is, but I'll post a link to it in the description, where it's about maybe a 20-25 minute video talking about, giving like a Cliff Notes version of the development of Expedition 33. Because of this first time studio thing, normally when I see a project look like this and look this good, my immediate reaction, other than wow, is that looks too good to be true. And it's something that the video games industry has trained me to do. It's trained me to look at projects that I think look very cool with a more skeptical eye, because I have been lied to before. We all have, by various companies out there. I could spend a whole video listing them and listing many examples over the years. Even though this game looked very promising, there was still that little voice in the back of my head going, too good to be true, too good to be true. And I'm here today to tell you all basically what you know already, that I absolutely adore Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I must say, there are points throughout the years recently where I feel like I have hit a mental brick wall with video games, where I'm playing through something and I'll just kind of have that feeling of, I'm not into this. Maybe this art form just is not really speaking to me anymore. Maybe it's time to kind of hang it up and not really engage with the art form as much as I usually do. But then I play a game like Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and I go, oh, it's not a me problem, it's a you problem. You, the video game industry, are not making things that really speak to me, and they just feel like sludge to play through. Because Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is one of the most passion-driven, thoughtful, entertaining, exciting, emotionally enthralling games I've played in a very long time. This is easily one of the best games I've played of the 2020s. It's one of the best games I've ever played. It's not perfect, and I'll get into the issues that I do have with the game throughout this review, but I love this game. I think after 2 playthroughs, this is definitely up there with some of the best RPGs I've ever played. I think it's definitely up there with the best that Final Fantasy has to offer. I think it's up there with the best Persona has to offer, with Persona 5 for me. I love it probably just as much as I love Radiata Stories, something like Radiata Stories or Dragon Quest VIII, which is crazy considering I've been playing those games for damn near 20 years now. For me, this is one of those projects where all of the right wires got crossed in all the right places, where all the right people were in all the right roles. They were talking about the right subject matter at the right time, with the right publisher, with the right support. And it's just one of those lightning in a bottle moments with this game. And it clearly shows, because it's resonated with a lot of people. let's get into Clair Obscur and talking about the game. I'll start with the storytelling, which I think is almost the second MVP of the game. I'll get into what I think is the most important aspect of the game later, but this is a story that is very emotionally powerful, and it has some of the best writing I've heard in a long time, where this is writing that deals with very dark and complex themes in respectful and mature ways, where I think on the rare occasion the writing dips a little in quality, because I think sometimes the way the story is told gets a little too convoluted and awkwardly written in order to hide key information with from the player that doesn't really land as much the second time around once you know certain things about the characters and what's going on in the world. And I think even in the first playthrough, I thought some of the details were telegraphed way too obviously. I think they tipped their hand a little bit too much in certain cases, especially during the first acts of the game. I still think overall the writing is superb. I think its characters are presented in very complex and sympathetic ways. They feel like real people when you listen to them talk and interact with one another. I think the way this game handles tone is excellent. While I think this game is very dark and sad and tragic throughout most of it, it finds ways to comfortably insert humor into the writing and the way the characters behave that doesn't feel out of place. It doesn't feel forced. And similar to real life, grief can be expressed and taken in a very multifaceted way. And it depends on the person and how they perceive things and how they wish to deal with grief. But one of the ways that grief can be dealt with is, in fact, a healthy dose of humor. I mean, I speak from personal experience. A few years ago, I had to say goodbye to one of my dogs that I'd had for damn near 16 years. It was very sad, of course, and it's not my first time losing a pet, but it was my first time losing one that I'd had for that long and had been with me throughout my major formative years as a person. And one of the ways that I dealt with grief the next day was going back to work, and, I would openly talk about what had happened with my coworker, but we were still joking and laughing as if nothing had ever really happened. And even though internally I knew that I had suffered a big loss, I felt better allowing myself to laugh and make jokes like I did with my coworkers on any other day. That helped me through the grieving process. And similar to a situation like that, these characters express humor and make jokes with one another, even in the face of such unbelievable tragedy. And I think even the bits of humor in this game that are not tied to jokes that the characters make come across as very organic. For example, there's a character named Esquier, who is this big French Totoro balloon creature that talks in a very silly way, behaves in a very silly way at times. His existence in this world does not offset the tragedy. In fact, I think having these breaks from the tragedy in the form of characters like Esquier makes the moments that are tragic punch all the more harder, because you get a glimpse of a different tone. You're allowed to just kind of marinate in this other vibe that the game has, where when you go back to the more sad moments of the game, you've had a break from them from so long that the effect hits harder. And just a massive credit to the lead writer, Jennifer Svedberg-Yen, who she says in her interviews that she's had that she's always kind of privately written stories for herself, but her career before joining Sandfall and working on the script for this was a private equity investor. It's like, what? How a private equity investor? It just turns on a heel to write one of the best scripts I've heard in a video game in a long time. I mean, it really is a staggering display of talent from this person. Now, moving on to the performances. This game has exceptionally strong performances from everyone. All of the main cast bring their A game. I think this is the best cast for a video game in a long time. If I were to single 3 performers out, I have to go first with Ben Starr, who of course played Clive in Final Fantasy XVI, who I heaped an enormous amount of praise on even though I'm not a big fan of Final Fantasy XVI, I think Ben Starr's performance as Clive is easily one of the highlights of that game. And I think, thank God that somebody has written, because while I like Clive as a protagonist, I don't think in hindsight he's a particularly complex character. This character that Ben Starr plays in this game is very complex, and it's a character archetype that I haven't really seen in a video game, maybe ever, given the circumstances of his character. And of course, I gotta give a shout out to the always reliable Andy Serkis, who is outstanding as always. I mean, this is a character that he plays that is just a really, really fascinating character, and if you need a character like this, you get somebody who is of established talent, and Andy Serkis. Is there really any argument against Andy Serkis being an outstanding actor at this point? I think it's kind of been established that he is amazing, and he brings, again, his A game to this game. The third voice actor that I want to highlight is Jennifer English, and this is actually my first time hearing Jennifer English in a big role like this, because a lot of people know her obviously from Baldur's Gate 3, but she is superb. She's another one that she is basically one of the big elements of heart and soul in this game as far as the cast goes. The way she is able to sell you on the more emotional parts of this story is extremely effective. Again, to the point where I was like getting misty-eyed at a few points in the story. And of course, I don't want to discredit Charlie Cox, who's fantastic. I don't want to discredit Kirsty Ryder, who's great as Lune. Shout out to Shala Nix, who I think is the unsung hero of the game with CL. I mentioned Eskie earlier. I apologize if I am butchering this person's name. Maxince Cazorla? I hope to God that's how I'm pronouncing that correctly, but absolutely excellent as Eskie. I love his voice, what he brings to it. There's another character that joins the party later on in the game that's voiced by Rich Keeble, who is fantastic as well. Now moving on to the gameplay. So this is the element of the game that I think is kind of like the olive branch to people who don't normally play turn-based RPGs. The turn-based gameplay in this game is almost like a gateway drug for people who don't usually like this style of combat, because they have found a brilliant way to meld the strategy of turn-based games of old and combine it with a more action-based, almost hack and slash vibe, Souls-like vibe to the combat that you get from things like Dark Souls and, more importantly, Sekiro, I think is the more important influence here. And I think it's not a coincidence at all that the creative director is a Sekiro speedrunner. So I think he took a lot of inspiration from that and applied it to this game. And I think this combat system tops nearly everything that a publisher like Square Enix has been trying to do for many years, trying to find this middle ground between turn-based combat and more action combat. And I think outside of the remake games, like I've said in other videos, I think Square Enix has lost the plot completely on trying to find this comfortable middle ground between the two, because they have just gone more and more and more into the action hack and slash portion of that balance, to the point where I think Final Fantasy XVI is just a shallow Devil May Cry clone. But this combat system to me is what Final Fantasy XVI should have been, where it does not sacrifice the strategy that comes with a turn-based game, and it does not sacrifice the dynamicism and the excitement that comes from a more real-time action game, a la Sekiro or Kingdom Hearts. And I think the reason for its big success is that they have fine-tuned how this combat system feels perfectly in a second-to-second way, where the dodging feels just right, the parrying system is excellent to pull off, and when you get all those parries in a row when it's an enemy's turn, that burst of excitement that you feel when you get a counterattack on an enemy and just damage the shit out of him never gets old. And I think learning and nailing the timing, while I think that is a big barrier to entry for a lot of people, it's definitely going to weed some people out. I know people that kind of aren't really as hot on this game as I am because of this combat system, having to learn the timing of it. But for me, it felt so rewarding when I just put my nose to the grindstone and really learned how to dodge and parry all the enemies, the unique timing that all of them have. It became almost like Sekiro for me, where this is the closest any game has gotten for me since Sekiro that has been able to nail the excitement of the parrying system in that game. And you have lots of little quality of life features like the Picto system, where you only need to use them in a primary slot 4 times before they can then be passive abilities for your party members. I like that you can mix and match them. This game has no problem letting you break the game if you know what you're doing. The game provides this wide avenue for experimentation. And again, it is I think it's almost a little too easy to break the game. That's one of my few big problems with the gameplay, is that I think if you really go out of your way to explore, it almost trivializes some of the challenges that come later on in the story. It doesn't give you that challenge without having to self-impose it that should be there, but it's not, because the game almost gives you too wide of an avenue for experimentation at times. I'd rather it be there than not at all, but this is definitely a problem that I've noticed with certain players. And straight up, I'll say it, I just want Final Fantasy to steal this combat system. If they're not going to use the really excellent combat system that they've created for the 7 remake games, then just take this, because I'd rather them steal this combat system whole cloth from Expedition 33 than use whatever the hell they were doing with Final Fantasy 15 and 13 and 16. I'd much rather see this. To me, this is more in the spirit of Final Fantasy than any mainline Final Fantasy's combat system in a very long time. And I like the exploration in this game. I like the way the levels are designed, but I have to echo probably the game's biggest criticism is that this thing desperately needs a minimap. Maybe not, I understand that they're trying to make the game more diegetic and immersive by not having you stare at a minimap every time you want to look around and search for collectibles, but maybe the first time through, I'm okay not having a minimap so I can kind of get lost. But when I'm going back and exploring the environment and trying to find things and trying to see what I've already got and not really knowing where I'm going and maybe going down a path that I already have been, but I don't know, so I've wasted all that time trying to get something that isn't really there, I think maybe then you need a minimap, or you can make the minimap a collectible in the game. Other games have done this, where you go around and find a map fragment. I think that is a fine compromise, but that's not there yet. Maybe it'll be there by the time this video comes out. I don't know. Maybe this is something that will be outdated in a few months when they start adding in more quality of life features, because they've already been doing that since the game came out. But this is the biggest criticism that I have as far as the gameplay goes. Just no minimap. It needs it. If you're gonna have people run around and look for collectibles, especially when you create these winding paths in a lot of the areas, you need a damn minimap, okay? You just need it. And another criticism I have of this game is that it is missing some quality of life features, like the retry, the instant retry, a battle thing. It doesn't have build loadouts. It lets you add favorites, a favorite tag to the Pictos that you like, but it's really a pain in the ass to switch between Pictos loadouts. I think the gestural games in this suck. I know that's by design, and the creative director has kind of admitted that because they wanted to create that feeling of frustration from other minigames in past RPGs, but it just that doesn't excuse how crap some of the gestural games are in this. And I don't think the platforming is very good. Some of the areas rely a little too much on platforming, especially the gestural games, and the platforming gameplay just No, it's not there. Another thing is I did encounter a few bugs when I was exploring the world map, which I think is great, by the way. But there were times where I would get stuck on part of the environment when I was looking around just trying to find hidden collectibles and enemy encounters, and I couldn't unstuck myself even after traveling to camp and then returning to where I was. It was still stuck in that same spot, so then I had to reload a save and then find a way to get back out there in the open world, and sometimes that would cost me a little bit of time. It was never too crazy, but it did happen. Now the visuals. This game looks stunning. This game, what it lacks, I think, in raw technical detail, because I've seen some people complain that it's not as detail-oriented as far as fidelity as something like Red Dead 2 or The Last of Us or anything like that. I personally could not give a shit. This could have the art style of something like Persona 5, or even less, like even lower budgeted game, and I would not give a shit, because I think this game has incredible art direction. I think the color palette that it uses is very, very striking, and I think its atmosphere in a lot of its environments is, quite frankly, awe-inspiring. Some of the best, most inspired set pieces in this game and images literally made my jaw drop, and I had to just sit there and really take in what I was seeing. And it's so inspired and creative, and it never felt like they were running out of ideas for these beautiful, jaw-dropping images that look like paintings come to life, and yet I can actually explore them. It's just wow. I will say there are some graphical flaws in the game, of course. Like, I think some of the texture loading pop-in is not very good. It's very noticeable, especially when you are exploring the world map. I think the lip syncing at a few points is pretty bad, especially more in the beginning. Sometimes the textures are a little distracting on certain characters. They can look a little blurry, but for an Unreal Engine 5 game, especially for a graphics engine that is notoriously problem-ridden, especially on consoles, I think for my money, this is one of the best usages of Unreal Engine 5 I've ever seen. And I think what's also incredible is the frame rate, where even though it does occasionally dip, you can kind of notice it, especially when the enemies are doing these massive, elaborately animated attacks. It very slightly hitches. Other than that, it ran flawlessly for me at 60 frames on the performance mode. It is incredible, the wizardry that Sandfall and their partners were able to do with Unreal Engine 5 in this game. As far as things like subtle facial animations and gestures and eye movements, some of the shit in this game rivals the best I've seen from companies like Rockstar and CDPR and PlayStation. Especially one moment I'll get to during the spoiler section that just blew me away with how subtle the eye animation and the facial animation was, and how this is a game that, through its writing, through its visual presentation, in a lot of ways embodies the idea that I have been pushing for a long time, that less is more. I get way more out of a single image in this game than I do for the entire scripts of other games. There are moments in this game, I've talked about audible, jaw-dropping moments and there are moments in this game besides jaw-dropping that got an audible wow out of me. There's one shot in particular later on that I think should be studied in how you frame characters and environments. And when I saw it, it was a boss phase transition cutscene. And the moment that it transitions into the second phase, and it combines with the music and the imagery that I was seeing, I just sat there and I went, wow, out loud when I saw it for the first time. And even then, even when I look at it now, it still blows me away with the shot composition and how they're able to edit in that moment with the music. And speaking of music, no, I have not forgotten about the music. I mentioned earlier that there is an MVP to this game, and this is it, the music. The music to me composed by Lorient Testard, is the best asset that this game has. And also shout out to his team that he had to work with, every singer, every orchestral person, every music arranger. Masterpiece. This is a masterpiece of a soundtrack. I don't think I'm quite there by saying that it is the best soundtrack I've ever heard, because I have heard some people say this. Even people that aren't as hot on the game as I am, they think this is the greatest soundtrack of all time. I'm not willing to go there, but Lorient Testard is a name you're going to be hearing a lot when the award season comes around, because, in my opinion, this is one of the all-time great game soundtracks. Because this is a soundtrack for me that if you had told me that this music was coming from one of the legendary RPG composers like Nobuo Uematsu or the late Koichi Sugiyama, or hell, even Yoko Shimomura, I'd believe you. Like, if you told me this is the latest soundtrack from Yoko Shimomura, I would go, yes, I believe it. I would say this is one of her best works. And then you go, but wait a minute, I tricked you. This is not Yoko Shimomura. This is somebody who has never written a full game score in their lives until today with this game. I would go, what? What the fuck? Someone who's never written, professionally done a professional full video game soundtrack like this. And not only is it their first time, they did 8 hours. You can go listen to more than 8 hours of this music. And I think what's amazing about this soundtrack is that it has a crazy amount of variety, crazy amount of unique tracks, crazy amount of genres and catchy melodies, and music that ranges from exciting to mysterious to heartbreaking to just insanely multifaceted and multi-layered, and you can tell the phase transitions that are happening in the certain songs. And there are some tracks in this game, and I think people that played Expedition 33 can probably think of the ones that I'm thinking of, that just made me sit back in awe with goosebumps and just go, what the fuck? Like, what the fuck is this? Like, what? How did this happen from a first-time composer? And a lot of this game's impact relies on the music, and it 1000% delivers. This is where I will have to stop the spoiler-free bits of this review. So, to give you all an overall before I go into spoilers for this, I mean, it's a given. Do I even really need to do the ask that would I recommend Clair Obscur Expedition? Fuck yeah, I would. Absolutely. Even if you don't like turn-based RPGs, I would highly recommend it. This is one of the highest recommendations I can give in this channel's history. In the entire time that I've been playing video games since this channel started, this is one of the easiest recommendations I can give. This is a game that I think is going to be something that it will influence a new generation of game developers. I think this is going to be one. I know that sounds extremely hyperbolic, but I'm being dead serious. I think when the next generation of game designers and writers and musicians come around, and they create an RPG, or hell, even if they create other games, they will have played Expedition 33 and go, I was inspired to get into this industry because of something like this. I was inspired to make art because of games like Expedition 33. I was inspired to get into writing because of a story like what's in Expedition 33. I was inspired to write beautiful music because of the masterpiece score that is in Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I think this is going to be a highly influential game for a new generation of RPG creators, or hell, a new generation of game designers in general. And I think this is a vastly important game, just overall, because it is a game that is not only about grief, but it's a game about art. It's a game about how we respond to art. And during a time where I feel like human art is being erased more and more by AI, we are hurtling ourselves towards this creatively dystopic future when it comes to art, where AI can now generate things that are borderline indiscernible from other people's work or style. I'm sure you all have seen the quite frankly disgusting, morally heinous Studio Ghibli AI art challenge. Like, animate this game using Studio Ghibli's Hayao Miyazaki's signature art direction. This morally, ethically disgusting crap that's been happening more and more in our world. And this is a game that is a giant middle finger to AI and its erasure of true artists and talent. And I think maybe I'm speaking about this with, like a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, hyperbolic kind of thing, but I really do genuinely believe that this game is extremely important to this art form, because it's not only a brilliant testament to human creation and human ingenuity and human creativity and human imagination. I think it is a giant middle finger to this increasingly prevalent rise of AI and AI generated art, and art in quotes, AI generated plagiarism. Expedition 33 I think is amazing in many, many ways, and I will give you all 10 seconds now to come back and listen to the spoiler section until, I'll give you all 10 seconds. So I'll count down. If you're away from your phone, you're away from your computer, now's the time, because I don't want to spoil anything if you haven't played the game to its completion. Now you are all in the spoiler section. Cuffs are off. So I think one of the big things in this game is how you're going to respond to the twists that occur in the third act. I think that is going to be the big make or break moment for a lot of people, because it's where the revelation happens that the world of Lumiere and this whole continent is just, it's a painting created by these beings called the Painters. And of course you all know the twist that Mael is really this person named Alicia, who came from the real world that this painting is in. She comes from this family that is broken apart by the death of the real Verso. And of course, you all know the twist that the paintress is really Aline, who is Mael / Alicia's mother in the real world, and Renoir, who has been portrayed as the villain this whole game. That person was really a painted version of Renoir, the real Renoir, and the real Renoir was the curator this whole time, who's the guy who's been upgrading your weapons. I mentioned earlier in the review that I think some of the telegraphing is a little on the nose. Part of that also has to do with my extensive experience playing RPGs like this and knowing some of the tropes, such as the tragic villain or the merchant, or the weapon upgrade smith being a boss or the final boss at some point in the story. But I think that is one of the amazing twists of the third act, where it takes a story trope, a twist that I usually hate, where it's along the lines of all of this was a dream or all of this was just a simulated world. But it takes that twist and finds a way to really let it click into everything that I had seen before. And once I finished the game and got the ending that I got and understood the full scope of what it was doing and what it was saying and what it was trying to explore, that's when the game really just wowed me. Just a huge, I was wowed already in certain aspects of the story before this, but this was the moment when I realized, when I understood the full scope of everything, where I just sat back and went, holy shit, they actually did it. They actually did it. They landed the plane. And I think one of the smartest decisions of Expedition 33 is that there really is no clear villain. There really are no villains in the story, because the people who you think are the villains turn out to be these really tragic, sympathetic figures. And if you're somebody who's ever gone through grief, definitely, maybe not even on the scale that Paintress and the real Renoir have in the world, it's incredibly sympathetic. And this is what makes the Paintress a much more complex, tragic character than what you would believe. It's what makes Renoir an incredibly sympathetic character. And I think my personal viewpoint is that Renoir is totally right throughout the story and throughout the third act. I think the explorations of grief and finding solace in art after terrible tragedy are very deeply felt and intelligently explored, because it fleshes out both sides of the argument. Because this is basically a big Lotus Eater machine debate. It's a big morality debate. It's all about what is better. Is it better to live in a fantasy where you are happy, or is it better to face reality that is a lot more tragic? I think both sides in this game are argued very compellingly. Even though I have my very stern, rigid stance on this issue, I think it presents this fascinating morality debate that fleshes out both sides and doesn't present clear villains and clear what is the wrong answer to this, because this game ends with the final choice, of course. You could either choose to be Maëlle and continue the painting, live in this fantasy to where she doesn't have to go back to being Alicia in the real world, where she's scarred and mute and stuck with a semi-broken family, or a broken family before she goes back. Or do you go as Verso, where he at this point is like, I don't want to live anymore, because I don't want to exist in this world where I am just continually miserable because of the designs of Aline / the paintress. This is not what my real life counterpart sacrificed himself for. My real life counterpart did not save Alicia from that fire in order to have her live in this fantasy and waste away. So I am going to force Maëlle / Alicia out of this painting and have her go and face reality, even if it means my own existence will be erased, even if it means wiping out this entire painting, even if it means basically committing what is omnicide. And normally I don't like it when games present you with a final choice after being linear 99% of the way through. That normally bugs me, but I think that was a good choice here, because it lets the player decide where they stand on this morality debate. Another smart thing, neither choice comes without serious consequences. You're either going to live in this fantasy, but the downside is you waste away, or you go back to the real world and face reality, but the downside is that there's still tragedy there that you have to face. Real tragedy that you can't just run away from now. But what's better? And the game ultimately lets you decide. And what I decided was the Verso ending, because I am somebody that's very all about, I would rather go back and face reality, even if it is tragic, than live in this fantasy where I know that it's not real. This game's story reminded me a lot of this short story called The Ones Who Walk Away from Amalus. And it's a story that I read back in, we had to read it back in elementary school. And it was written by Ursula K. Le Guin. And it's this story about this utopian city called Amalus that is this perfect society. Doesn't have kings or any political warfare. There's no social inequality. There's no economic hardship. Everybody is living beautifully. There are massive parades. The sun is bright. Everybody's happy. There's orgies. It's wonderful. There's no misery for the citizens. Except for one. The price that must be paid for this utopian society is this one child that must be kept in constant misery. And when citizens in this utopian society are old enough to know the truth, a lot of them ultimately look at this child and go, well, this is horrible, but we can live with that. But there are some that learn this truth about how their society operates and walk away from this utopia, because they believe that this price to pay of letting this little girl be kept in constant misery and filth and pain and darkness, it's not worth it. So that's where the title comes from, The Ones Who Walk Away from Amalus. And it reminded me of that moral philosophical debate that's at the heart of that story. So that's why I ended up choosing the Verso ending, where I just said, fuck it, destroy it all, so Maëlle could be forced back to the real world and not waste away in this painting. Because even though it is happiness that she would feel and power she would feel in this world, it's a lie. It's a lie, and it comes at the expense of herself. It comes at the expense of her family that are just going to be continuously broken without any chance of reconciliation or learning to grieve in a healthy way or accepting the death of the real Verso, no matter how tragic it is. But again, that ending does not come without consequences, where I basically committed in this game what is, for all intents and purposes, Omnicide, which is the total death of this world. And I think one of the most amazing moments of very subtle animation comes when Verso is being confronted by Ciel, wordlessly being confronted by Ciel and Lune, where Ciel kind of reaches out to Verso and gives him this look. To me, that signifies, because there's a point earlier on in the story where she says if she could also make the same decisions that Verso has made throughout the story and it would bring back her husband, she would do the same thing. So she gives Verso this look of sadness, yet understanding. And it really is, I think it is an amazing bit of facial animation that Ciel is able to express this with such a measured look on her face. And she very gently extends out her arm as if to almost gently comfort Verso. And she lightly brushes against his arm and his hand, but then she pulls away as she fades away, as if to say, I will comfort you, but I don't forgive you. I understand what you're doing, but I still resent you in a way for basically killing me and my world and killing any chance I have of reuniting with my dead husband. And then you have Lune, who gives Verso this death stare, and it's this powerful mix on her face of grief, but acceptance, and yet anger towards Verso for doing this. And she just gives Verso this look. If looks could kill, that would be what Lune's look was. And she just sits down and accepts her fate. Doesn't cry, doesn't try to bargain. She just sits down, gives Verso this death stare, and accepts her fate. And I think it's a great detail that you don't see her fading away, because some things are better left unseen and unsaid. And I think that's a philosophy that Sandfall took to heart with some of the elements of this game. There is more impact with certain things when they are not said or when they are not seen, like Lune fading away into nothing. Because all you need to know about Lune, all you need to know about her relationship with Verso and her feelings towards him is that stare. Anywho, that's all I wanted to say about the ending. I think it presents a really fascinating moral argument that is executed quite brilliantly and with a lot of maturity and thought, careful consideration. If you made it this far into the review, I mean, you already know what happened in the story or you've already played it, so I can't say go ahead and play it. But in the odd chance that you've watched this spoiler bit and haven't played Expedition 33 yet, I mean, even though you just ruined it for yourself, I still recommend going out and playing it, because it's, as a game, functionally as a video game that you play with a combat system and exploration, it's a hell of a lot of fun. Anyway, major kudos to Sandfall Interactive, major kudos to Kepler Interactive, who have quietly been becoming a really excellent publisher these last few years. And I think this is easily the best game they've published yet. It's clear that they have some very smart people at the helm of that studio who can recognize talent and nurture it. And I look forward to whatever both parties do next. So, anywho, thank you so much. If you like what you see, subscribe. Let me know what you thought of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. And as always, I am Razorblade Mango. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all later. Goodbye.